Hi, class. Today we're going to look at lesson number 3 from unit number 1, Fundamentals of Economics, and today's lesson is Productive Resources. But before we go on to that, we want to make sure we check over our homework and to see that you've done everything correctly. So take a look at some of these answers. The first questions are talking about some of the fallacies. So you want to try to see if you've got what I have, and if you don't, see if they're at least consistent with my answers, and if they aren't, ask me some questions or try to figure out why that's the case. Question 2 is about the cause and effect strategy, the post hoc fallacy, and the single causation fallacy, kind of figuring out why they're different or how they are different, because often they get confused. 3 talks about relative cost. 4 about increasing returns and what factors need to be there to have increasing returns. And then the last one talks more about economies of scale and large scale companies. So that's the homework that we did. And so today's lesson on productive resources, our learning goals are to know how to identify productive resources, be able to answer the 3 main economic questions, understand the differences in the types of economies. And the success criteria is going to be there's going to be some independent work and team teaching potentially, completion and review of homework. So in the team teaching section, as we're in a little bit of a different scenario these days, we'll see what we can do, but we're going to be doing some independent research on different types of economies. And so we want to ensure that we all have kind of similar pieces of information, pros and cons for different types of economies. So if we go on with today's lesson, we want to first start at looking at the productive resources and factors of production. So what are these two things? You may have encountered these two terms or these terms in a geography class or other business courses, but essentially what they are is anything that can be used to create or manufacture goods or services. Things that help aid in production, things that are used for productions, things that you use or things that are used to do work, to do economy. Okay, and so effectively they come in a few different categories. One being land, surface and below ground, earth, air, and sea. Anything that the earth gives us, not just earth as ground, but the world gives us. Okay. 2, labor. We talk about human effort, physical and mental effort that people give to their jobs, to creating things, and that's manual labor. And the 3rd is capital. Capital are goods that aid in production. So there are several different types of capital, but right now we're talking about is real capital. Capital could be like machinery, factories, things that help perhaps your land or your laborers to do more production, right? So a laborer that uses an assembly line or is at an assembly line is going to produce faster than if they didn't have the assembly line. Land, that farmland that's being farmed with capital goods like machinery is going to be yield better results than if it's just with a person trying to farm the entire land themselves, right? So land, labor, and capital are the typical factors of production that most economists or most people are going to be talking about. So when we talk about productive resources, those are the main 3, but we want to also think about things like entrepreneurship. And so while entrepreneurship is a laborer kind of thing, all these things can be physically kind of seen and counted. Maybe not mental effort so much, but these are more tangible type things, right? But entrepreneurship is not so tangible, right? An entrepreneur is someone who is able to organize economic activity, is willing to assume some risk, and through that can achieve effective results, right? Just doing the risk and just doing something but always failing. Are you an entrepreneur? Yes, you're a serial entrepreneur perhaps, and you want to do it, but are you good at it? Maybe not. So we want to kind of separate the people who are doing effective entrepreneurship work as those people are pushing our economy forward and are increasing what's happening in our economy, right? So I bring that up because we talked about the tangible versus the intangible, right? So land, labor, capital being tangible versus intangible things like entrepreneurship and the knowledge base, right? Individuals can learn things. Individuals can get experience. And these things while you may have a degree that looks tangible, they're very intangible, right? You don't know what someone can do until you actually see them do it, right? It's very difficult to assess someone's skills just by reading their resume, right? What do they know how to do? What skills do they have in terms of your knowledge base, right? Those things are intangible. It's very hard to read, very hard to see in normal terms. So ultimately, why are we talking about productive resources, right? So obviously they have a lot to do with the economy, a lot to do with creating things, right? So they fall into our decision-making process, right? Earlier lessons we talked about, why do we study economics, right? We study economics because we have to learn how to make decisions about scarce resources to satisfy the needs and wants of our people, right? So those decisions have to deal with our productive resources. And so people have been figuring out, trying to determine, what's the best way to solve these problems? What's the best way to figure out how to use these resources in the best way possible to come to good outcomes, right? So the study of economics helps us figure out, what should these people be doing? What should this machinery be used for, right? And again, these answers are changing generation to generation, right? These days we're talking lots about climate change. These days we're talking a lot about, where should we be producing our goods locally or offshore, things like that. So all of our economies are trying to figure out, what is the best way to figure out these things. And so these questions can be framed in three main things, right? So we're trying to figure out the answers to what to produce, goods or services, which ones we're going to produce, how many alternatives should we give of these things, two, the how to produce, by what means are we going to produce said goods and services, who is going to produce it, right? Is it going to be a government enterprise? Is it going to be fully privatized? Are we going to end up getting it from international trade? Which resources are we going to use to produce these things, right? If I'm going to power this city, am I going to choose fossil fuels? Am I going to choose a different type of cleaner energy, right? What's cheaper? What's more expensive? All these kinds of things. And then for whom to produce, right? Who gets access to all these materials? Are you going to privatize healthcare? Or are you going to make it a publicly funded thing, right? Does everyone get equal access to healthcare, or should we not have everyone having equal access to healthcare, right? How is this stuff, these things shared? Who gets it and why, actually, right? So we have to kind of figure out those answers to those questions. And ultimately, the for whom to produce question will often take us to questions of equality and equity, right? And so understanding our productive resources, understanding our economies, help us understand how to answer what to produce, how to answer how to produce, and ultimately how to answer for whom to produce, right? And even if you think right now, think about Canada. Canada is a type of economy. We produce certain types of things. We choose to produce those things in different methods. And we choose whom gets what things differently than a country like the United States, who is our neighbor. We're both kind of capitalistic societies, but we'll talk more about those a little bit later, right? How does each nation answer these questions, right? And so clearly, even in Canada, if you look at the Liberal Party, if you look at the NDP, you look at the Conservatives, they're all going to answer these questions in slightly different ways, right? And again, none are wrong or right in a very black and white way, but the answers to those questions might kind of give you an insight into what are the priorities of these individuals, of these parties, of these people, right? Even how you answer these questions are going to kind of give you a little bit of insight into what are your priorities. What do you value as an individual, or what do you think is right, right? So we're going to kind of examine those things and help you to kind of examine even your own way of thinking, right? And so I've mentioned economic systems like Canadian systems or American systems, right? So what are these economic systems? An economic system is a set of laws, institutions, and practices that identify how to use scarce resources to satisfy needs and wants, right? So it's solving or trying to solve the economic problem of scarcity, right? So we're answering these three questions with our economic systems, right? Canada does it in a certain way, United States does it in a certain way. And what type of economy is Canada? What type of economy is the United States? And so we're going to explore these things now. So our types of economic systems, right? I mentioned capitalist. I mentioned you'll hear socialist, but we're not going to go to there yet. We're going to go there on our next lesson. But we're talking more generalized systems right now. And so the first one is the traditional economy. The second one is the command economy, and the third one is the market economy. Okay, and so you're going to notice that each of these slides has no content on them, and so I mentioned our team teaching before, and so now I want you to take the time to exit out of this video, and so you're going to see some instructions on Edsby in terms of what to do in terms of how you're going to fill out your notes. And so the instructions are going to be that all of you are going to start filling in information on traditional economy, command economy, and market economy. And you want to focus on several things. One, what is this economy? What frames this economy? What do they do? How do they operate? That kind of stuff. Two, what are the pros to this methodology? What's good about this system, right? And three, what are maybe the drawbacks to this system? What's negative about what they're doing here, right? And so you want to find out how they operate, examples of them, why it's good, why it's bad, and kind of figure out, what are some of the intricacies behind these systems and maybe where they exist, why they exist, examples like that. And so please go on Edsby, look at the instructions, and then after that, we're also going to zoom a little bit kind of to talk through each one of these three different systems. All right, thank you.